The shouting started before the sun had climbed high. Mabel stumbled forward, pushed into the middle of the market square by the rough hand of her father. Her boots dragged across the dirt, and dust rose in little clouds around her ankles. She wanted to beg him, to plead with him once more, but her voice broke before the words could rise. The town was gathered, men with folded arms and sharp eyes, women whispering into each other's ears, children peeking from behind aprons, wide-eyed at the strange display. The smell of manure and smoke clung to the spring wind, but it was not as heavy as the shame crushing Mabel's chest. Her father, once known as a respected cattle broker, now stood bitter and desperate. Debt had carved the pride from his back. He jabbed his finger at her as though she were no more than livestock. Half the price of a steer, folks. She can cook, sew, and keep quiet. Anyone with coin can take her home tonight. Laughter spread through the crowd. A few chuckled, others shook their heads. But no one stepped forward. Mabel's cheeks burned. She could feel the weight of every eye on her. Memories poured back like fresh wounds. The white wedding dress ripped from her shoulders. The hands that shoved her out of her husband's door after years of trying to give him a child. 2 years of praying, of swallowing every bitter herb the midwife offered, of waiting for a miracle that never came. Then, without mercy, he had chosen another wife, younger, sharper, proud enough to promise 5 sons if the Lord allowed. Mabel had been thrown out the very day the new girl arrived. Now she stood in dust and ruin, called worthless by her own blood. Her father barked again. Anyone? She's 22, still has her teeth, just faulty inside. The silence cut deep, broken only by the shuffle of boots. Then came heavier steps, slow, steady, purposeful. The crowd parted. A man approached, tall and broad-shouldered, with sawdust clinging to his shirt. His hat shadowed most of his face, but his jaw was strong, and his hands looked carved from years of hard labor. His eyes, when he lifted them, were not cruel. They were simply tired. He said nothing. He reached into his coat and laid a pouch of coins on the table. The sound of metal clinking was enough to silence the jeers. Mabel's father raised an eyebrow. "You sure she don't come with a refund?" The man's gaze flicked to Mabel. He held it there for a long moment, then turned back. She won't be judged anymore. That was all. He turned to leave, not even glancing to see if she would follow. Mabel's heart pounded. Was this mercy or another prison? Around her, the crowd was already scattering, bored of the spectacle. Her father gave her one last shove. "Go on, then. You're his now." Her hands shook as she bent to pick up her small satchel. Nothing of worth inside, just old shoes and a locket with her mother's face. She followed the man into the bright dust of the street. He led her to a mule-drawn cart tied near the blacksmith's. Without a word, he waited until she climbed up herself, then handed her a canteen. "Long ride," he said. She drank. The water tasted of tin, but it cooled her throat. For a long while they traveled in silence. The prairie stretched endlessly, fields of brittle grass and fences leaning like old men. Above them, the sky seemed too wide, too empty. She risked a glance at him. His face was weathered, not old, perhaps 30. A scar crossed one knuckle, a splinter lodged in his thumb, no wedding ring. Her voice cracked when she finally whispered, "Why? Why take me?" He didn't look at her. 4 kids. No mother, no time to find one the polite way. Her breath caught. "So I'm a governess." No, his voice was flat but steady. Just someone, not cruel. "That's enough." The cart rocked as it crossed a creek bed. Mabel turned her face away, her chest aching with questions she dared not ask. By nightfall, they reached a cabin tucked into a grove of pine and cottonwood. The porch sagged. A wagon wheel leaned against the barn. Chickens scattered at their arrival. Behind a curtain, 4 small faces peeked out, wide and wary. 3 boys and a girl, red cheeks, suspicious eyes. "This is Miss Mabel." The man told them she'll be staying the youngest, barely 3, waddled forward and clung to his leg. The man bent to lift him with one arm, pushing the door open with the other room upstairs. He said to her, "Warm water's in the bucket." Her legs trembled as she climbed the stairs. The room was small but clean. A narrow bed, a single window overlooking the field. She sank down, silent tears slipping from her eyes. She had not chosen this life. But for the first time in weeks, no one had demanded to know why she was broken. No one had cursed her empty womb. Downstairs, the sound of children's voices filled the cabin. They were not kind, not yet. Wild and restless, sharp with suspicion. But they were alive. That night, as she lay under a worn quilt, Mabel closed her eyes and listened to the creak of the house, the faint laughter of children, and the steady footsteps of the man who had pulled her from the market. Her fate was unknown, her heart bruised, but somewhere deep within the ache, a single thought flickered. Maybe, just maybe, this cabin in the pines was not the end. It might be the place where her story truly began. The morning sun cut through the cabin's blanket-covered doorway, spilling light onto the worn floorboards. Mabel rose early, her body still stiff from travel and her heart heavy with uncertainty. She heard the children below, their voices high and restless. The smell of smoke and pine filled the air, mixed with the sour scent of old bread. She tied back her hair and stepped downstairs. 4 pairs of eyes turned to her. The oldest boy, Josiah, crossed his arms and narrowed his gaze. The second, Eli, scowled and muttered something about being hungry. Hannah, the girl, clung to her father's leg like a burr, and the youngest, Benji, just stared at her with wide curiosity. Mabel forced a smile, though her hands trembled. She reached for the pot by the stove. The water sloshed, heavier than she remembered. She burned the first beans, choked on the smoke, and nearly cried when the bread failed to rise. Her fingers felt clumsy with the needle as she tried to mend socks. Silence followed every mistake, and the weight of waiting for someone to scold her nearly crushed her. Then came the accident. One afternoon, while lifting a pot of stew, her hands slipped. The whole meal crashed onto the floor, splattering across the boards. The noise startled the hens outside. Mabel froze, heart pounding, bracing for a shout or a slap. But the lumberjack, Silas, just walked over, crouched down, picked up the pot, and said quietly, "It's only stew." That was all. That night, Mabel wept softly on the porch, the quiet broken only by the wind through the pines. She thought she was alone until little Benji toddled out and climbed into her lap, laying his head on her chest without a word. The days rolled on. Mabel tucked the children into bed each night, humming lullabies she barely remembered. Her voice trembled, but the little ones listened anyway. When storms rolled in, the wind howling like wolves, Hannah grew feverish, her cheeks red with heat. Silas looked helpless, a man strong enough to split wood with one swing but powerless before sickness. Mabel did not hesitate. She boiled willow bark, crushed mint leaves, pressed cool cloths against the girl's forehead, and whispered comfort through the long night. She did not rest until dawn. When Hannah's fever finally broke, the girl mumbled about pancakes and drifted back to sleep. Silas stood in the doorway, his arms folded. His face showed little, but his shoulders sagged with relief. His eyes lingered on Mabel as if seeing her for the first time, not as a burden, but as something steady and rare. The next morning, Mabel found a mug waiting on the table. Steam curled from the spout of the kettle, and beside it a small note scratched in stiff handwriting. "Thank you." Her throat tightened as she held the cup. From that day on, something shifted. The children, once distant, drew closer. Benji called her Maple, his tiny voice stumbling over the name. Hannah began to follow her shadow like it was safer than her father's arm. Josiah tested her less, and Eli sat at her feet as she mended clothes. Still, fear lived under her ribs. She knew how fast trust could be stolen. One afternoon, Silas asked her to ride into town with him. He said nothing more, just handed her the reins as if she belonged there. In the market, gossip ran thick. Mabel stepped outside the store while Silas waited in line for supplies. That was when she heard the voice. Sharp. Cruel. "Well, if it isn't the barren ghost, Mabel turned slowly. Her former mother-in-law stood near the dry goods, a folded paper in hand. Beside her stood the new wife, young and smug, lace gloves gleaming, her hand resting on her flat belly as though boasting of something not yet there. "That's her," the girl asked loudly. "Yes." The older woman sneered, pretty but cursed. "Couldn't give us even a pup." The girl smirked. "I will. A big, healthy boy." The family name will live on Mabel's fists, clenched at her sides, but she kept her silence. Her throat burned with words she refused to give them. Then a hand touched her shoulder. Silas. He stood tall, dirt still clinging to his boots, his gaze steady as stone. He looked at the two women for a long, quiet moment. Then he spoke, his voice low but clear. "She is the only one who gets my daughter to sleep. The only one who taught Benji not to throw stones. The only one who makes our house feel like it has a roof." Neither woman replied. Their smirks faltered. Silas turned and guided Mabel away, his hand light but firm at her back. No more words wasted. The wagon ride home was silent but different. For the first time in years, Mabel did not feel small. She felt seen. That night, she gathered wildflowers by the well and twisted them into a small wreath. She didn't know why. She only knew her hands needed to make something soft again. And while she braided stems beneath the fading light, she felt something unfamiliar stirring inside her chest. Not fear, not shame. Something gentler. Something that might one day be called hope. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. The weeks after that market day rolled by like clouds over the ridge. Mabel's hands grew steady again, her voice stronger. She began teaching the children their letters with bits of charcoal on old wood. She stitched ribbons for Hannah, carved scarves from feed sacks for the boys, and hummed as she worked. The house no longer echoed with emptiness. Then came the whispers. The proud new wife who once boasted of bearing sons still carried no child. Her belly stayed flat. Her smile turned brittle. People muttered of secrets and shame, and before long the truth spilled out. Her faithfulness had been a lie. When the betrayal came to light, Mabel's ex-husband aged 10 years in a single week. One morning, while Mabel was buying flour, he appeared before her. His hat was crushed in his hands, his eyes full of regret. "Mabel," he said, voice breaking, "I was wrong. You were the only one who ever truly cared for me." She raised her chin. "I remember the day you let your mother spit on me. The day you threw me out like a spoiled meal. You have no right to speak of care." He swallowed hard. "I was a fool." Mabel stepped closer, her voice steady. "I have 4 children who call me Mama. I have a man who never asks what I cannot give, only what I choose to share. My house is full of laughter, and I would rather sweep ashes for Silas than sit in your parlor like a trophy." Her ex-husband's mouth opened, but no words came. She turned and walked away. Across the street, Silas stood with a sack of rice, his eyes soft. He had heard it all. That night, as the stars burned bright, she sat by the well. The air was cool, and the world seemed quiet, until a figure staggered from the shadows. Jed, a trapper from down the ridge, half drunk and smelling of sweat, leaned against the fence. "Well, look who it is," he slurred. "The pretty mule Silas dragged home. Thought you were barren, but you've been raising kids just fine." "Go home, Jed," Mabel said firmly. He stepped closer. Just a smile. "That's all." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard. Before she could cry out, a shadow thundered from the barn. "Silas!" One punch dropped Jed into the dirt, his body crumpling like a sack. Silas turned to her, his chest heaving. "You all right?" His voice was low, urgent. She nodded, though her eyes filled with tears. Silas untied his kerchief and wrapped it gently around her wrist. "No one touches you." "Not unless I say back inside." She washed his bleeding knuckles. Her hands trembled as she dabbed them with clean cloths. "You didn't have to," she whispered. Silas shook his head. I can't watch anyone hurt you.